Vou criar um roteiro de história emocionante baseado no tema fornecido. Percebo que você deseja um roteiro em inglês para uma história de vingança/justiça, com foco em uma reviravolta após uma grande perda. Primeiro, analisarei seu tema. I lost my $4.2 million house in custody at court. What I found in mom's basement gave me 140 million and destroyed them all. Este é claramente um tema de vingança e justiça, onde o protagonista sofre uma traição e perda significativa, mas encontra algo que permite uma reviravolta dramática. Vou criar um roteiro completo seguindo exatamente a estrutura solicitada. Bloco 00. Hook magnético. 100 palavras. They celebrated taking my house and daughter with champagne on the courthouse steps. My ex-wife, her lawyer-turned-lover, and the judge who ruled against me, all smiling. 6 months later, I watched them beg for mercy from the same steps. My name is Daniel Harmon, and this is how I went from sleeping in my car to owning their law firm. The box in my mother's basement wasn't supposed to exist. My father made sure of that before he died. But what they never understood was that Dad recorded everything for 30 years, including the night they buried the truth along with that girl. Bloco 1. Vida antes da queda, mais início da traição. 1000 palavras. Every morning at 5:45, I'd kiss Melissa's forehead while she slept, slip out of our custom California king bed, and head to the master bathroom. Our $4.2 million colonial in Westchester County had 6 bathrooms, but this one, with its heated marble floors and rainfall shower, was my sanctuary. By 6:30, I was in my Audi, coffee in hand, heading to the firm. Daniel Harmon, 42, senior partner at Caldwell, Bishop & Harmon. I'd built the family law division from nothing into a $14 million annual revenue stream. My father Earl had been so proud when they added our name to the letterhead 5 years ago. Legacy secured, he'd said, squeezing my shoulder with a weathered hand. My daughter Sophie was 12, brilliant and fearless like her mother. Every Wednesday, I left work early to watch her lacrosse practice, then took her for ice cream at Morgan's, the parlor my father had taken me to as a kid. She always ordered mint chocolate chip in a waffle cone, and I always pretended not to notice when she let it drip on purpose. "Dad, you work too hard," she said one Wednesday, chocolate smeared across her chin. "Mom says that's why you guys fight." "Your mom and I are fine, Soph," I said, passing her a napkin. "Law firms are just demanding." I didn't tell her about the coldness that had crept between Melissa and me over the past year, how she'd stopped asking about my cases, how her eyes would drift to her phone whenever I spoke. Home was a 6,400 square foot showcase of our success. Custom kitchen with Viking appliances, wine cellar, pool with cascading waterfall. The living room shelves held the first edition Hemingway my father had given me when I made partner. Photos of Sophie at every age, and the small wooden boat I'd carved with Dad when I was 10. These things mattered more than the house itself. Judge Franklin Palmer came for dinner at least once a month. He'd mentored me after law school, wrote the recommendation that got me hired at Caldwell. He'd officiated at our wedding, was Sophie's godfather. "Daniel's going to be running this county someday," he'd tell anyone who'd listen, his hand warm on my shoulder. The first time I noticed something was off was during our annual charity gala in April. Melissa was wearing a new dress, emerald silk, backless, that I'd never seen. When Judge Palmer arrived, his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. Later, I found them on the terrace, standing closer than friends should, their conversation ending abruptly when I approached. "Just discussing the school board election," Palmer said, his voice too casual. I pushed the thought away. Franklin was 62, happily married to Linda for 37 years. He was family. My suspicion felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, Melissa asked me to represent her cousin Eric in his divorce. "Candace is after everything," she said. "He needs someone ruthless." I agreed without hesitation. Eric had always been decent to me, despite the family's initial reservations about the lawyer Melissa brought home. The case was straightforward. 15-year marriage, 2 teenage boys, substantial assets to divide. I prepared meticulously, confident in both my strategy and the fairness of our legal system. The Friday before the trial began, I worked late, finalizing preparations. The office was empty except for Cameron Bishop, the firm's founding partner, who stopped by my office door. "Daniel, got a minute?" His face was grave in a way that tightened my chest. "What's wrong? Is it Sophie?" My mind raced to car accidents, hospital rooms. "No, nothing like that." He closed my door, something he never did. "There's no easy way to say this. We have a situation with Judge Palmer's docket, specifically, cases you've handled." I shook my head, confused. What kind of situation? "Patterns of favorable rulings, suspicious ones." He placed a folder on my desk. "The Judicial Conduct Committee is investigating. They've subpoenaed our records." "That's ridiculous. Franklin's as ethical as they come." Cameron's expression didn't change. "Phone records show repeated calls between the judge and this firm at odd hours, not to the main line." My stomach dropped. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, but the firm needs to protect itself. We need to know if you've been involved in any improper communications." The accusation hung in the air between us, 20 years of reputation on the line. "This is absurd," I said, standing. "I've never—" "There's more." Cameron looked away. "The calls traced to Melissa's phone." The world tilted beneath me. I gripped the desk. Memories rearranging themselves into new patterns. Late-night texts she'd hide when I entered the room. Sudden dinner cancellations. The growing distance. "I'm sure there's an explanation," I said, but my voice betrayed me. Cameron nodded, but his eyes held pity. "Take the weekend. Talk to Melissa. But Daniel, the firm comes first. We need to get ahead of this." I drove home in a fog, the skyline of New York blurring through unshed tears. Our house blazed with lights, odd for 9:30 p.m. Sophie should have been in bed. Melissa's car was in the driveway, alongside an unfamiliar black Lexus. I entered quietly through the mudroom, hearing voices from the kitchen, Melissa's and a man's. I moved toward them, my wedding ring suddenly heavy on my finger. I still believed there was an explanation. I still believed in the life we'd built. They were sitting at the island counter, papers spread between them, 2 wine glasses half empty. Judge Franklin Palmer looked up first, his familiar face flushing red. Melissa turned more slowly, and I saw no surprise in her eyes, only calculation. "You're home early," she said, her voice steady. Too steady. "What is this?" I asked, looking at the papers. Palmer stood, straightening his tie. "Daniel, we were going to talk to you next week, after Eric's case concluded." I stepped closer, scanning the documents upside down. Divorce papers, property valuations, financial statements I'd never seen before. "How long?" I asked, the question directed at both and neither of them. Melissa stood now too. "Daniel, let's discuss this privately." "How long have you been planning this? How many of my cases have you discussed with him?" My voice was rising now, control slipping. Palmer raised his hands placatingly. "This isn't what you think." "What I think," I said, each word deliberate, "is that I'm looking at conspiracy and judicial misconduct, at the very least." Melissa's face hardened. "This is exactly why it's over." "Daniel, everything is always about your precious career, your precious reputation." I was about to respond when I heard a small sound from the hallway. Sophie stood there in her pajamas, eyes wide and frightened, looking between the 3 adults in her kitchen, her world, with dawning comprehension. "Dad?" she whispered. "What's happening?" I reached for her, but Melissa was faster, pulling our daughter to her side. "Nothing, honey. Judge Franklin and I were just showing Dad some papers. Go back to bed." Sophie looked at me, uncertainty in her eyes. I wanted to tell her everything would be all right, but for the first time in my life, I couldn't promise my daughter that the truth would prevail. Not when I was just beginning to understand how deeply the lies went. Bloco 2. A queda completa mais fundo do poço. 1000 palavras. The next 6 weeks unfolded like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Melissa filed for divorce the following Monday, requesting full custody of Sophie. The firm suggested I take a leave of absence while they conducted an internal investigation. By Wednesday, my credit cards were declined. By Friday, I discovered Melissa had emptied our joint accounts, $341,290 transferred to an account I had no access to. I couldn't even afford to retain proper counsel. Every attorney in the county suddenly had conflicts of interest. The few who would speak to me quoted retainers of $50,000 or more, knowing I couldn't pay. I was being systematically isolated. Month 1. I sold my Rolex, $18,500, and Audi, $64,000, to hire Tim Grayson, a semi-retired attorney from Albany. He seemed confident until he realized who the opposing counsel was, James Carter, the state bar president and Judge Palmer's former law partner. Month 2. Melissa's team presented evidence that I had discussed cases inappropriately with clients, suggesting ethical violations that could end my career. My father's oldest friend, Bernard Klein, called to tell me he couldn't be seen with me anymore. "Politics," he mumbled apologetically. My brother Mark was the only family member who still answered my calls. Month 3. I was staying in a $79 per night motel off I-87. The firm officially terminated my partnership, citing breach of fiduciary duty. My remaining assets were frozen pending investigation. When I tried to see Sophie at her school, security escorted me off campus. Melissa had filed a restraining order claiming I was unstable and potentially dangerous. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and I still believed the system would work. Judge Imogene Davis was known for fairness, for seeing through theatrics. I wore my last good suit and the silver tie clip my father had given me when I passed the bar. The courtroom was packed, colleagues, neighbors, even parents from Sophie's school. Not there to support me, I realized, but to witness the spectacle of my downfall. Melissa sat at the plaintiff's table, elegant in navy blue, eyes forward. Judge Palmer wasn't present, but his influence filled the room. When Judge Davis entered, I felt a flicker of hope. It died when I saw her face. She'd already decided. The proceedings were a formality. Melissa's attorney presented affidavits from therapists I'd never met, school counselors who claimed Sophie showed signs of distress in my presence. They submitted financial records suggesting I'd misappropriated client funds, documents so expertly falsified I almost believed them myself. When my turn came, Judge Davis watched with thinly veiled impatience as Tim presented our case. When he called Sophie to testify, Melissa's attorney objected. The child has been through enough trauma. Judge Davis sustained the objection. Sophie would not be heard. The ruling came swiftly. Melissa received full custody. I was granted supervised visitation, twice monthly. The house, all remaining assets, even my partnership equity, all awarded to Melissa. I was ordered to pay $12,000 monthly in support, despite having no income. As the gavel fell, Melissa turned to me, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "You should have settled when you had the chance," she whispered. Outside the courthouse, I saw them, Melissa, her attorney, and Judge Palmer, descending the steps together. Palmer's arm slid around my wife's waist as an assistant handed them champagne flutes. They were celebrating. They had planned this all along. I spent that night in my car, parked outside the house I'd paid for, watching the lights go out one by one. When morning came, 2 security officers knocked on my window. "Sir, you need to leave the neighborhood. We have reports of suspicious activity." I had $127 in my wallet and nowhere to go. I drove to my mother's house in Millbrook, the small two-bedroom where I'd grown up. She died 3 years earlier, and I'd kept the place out of sentiment, despite Melissa's insistence we sell it. Now, it was in foreclosure, another detail I'd missed while my life imploded. I broke in through the back door, knowing the electricity and water would be off soon. The musty silence greeted me like an old friend. I collapsed on the plastic-covered couch and finally let the tears come. In this house, at least, no one would witness my shame. Days blurred together. I found odd jobs for cash, washing dishes at a diner, helping contractors haul debris. I grew a beard to avoid recognition. Former clients would sometimes walk past me without a second glance, my invisibility now complete. My first night in the shelter came after the bank officially repossessed my mother's house. Mount Carmel Men's Shelter housed 48 men in a converted gymnasium. My bunk neighbor was Gerald, a Vietnam veteran who'd been homeless for 20 years. "First night's the hardest," he said, offering me half a sandwich he'd saved from dinner. "After that, you either get stronger or you don't make it." I called Sophie every day, but the calls went straight to voicemail. I left messages until her mailbox was full. Then I wrote letters she probably never received. On a Tuesday in November, 4 months after the hearing, I was picking up trash in Westchester Park, community service for a loitering charge, when I saw them. Sophie and Melissa walking with Judge Palmer. They were laughing, his arm around my daughter's shoulders as if he had the right, as if he hadn't destroyed her father. I ducked behind a maintenance shed, bile rising in my throat. Sophie looked happy. Part of me was grateful for that. The larger part felt a despair so complete I considered walking into the park's lake and not coming out. That night at the shelter, I found my bunk had been cleared out. Someone had stolen my backpack containing my last clean shirt and the photo of Sophie I kept with me. It was the final straw. I sat on the back steps, head in my hands, wondering if this was how my story ended. "Rough day?" Gerald appeared beside me, smoke from his cigarette curling in the cold air. "Lost everything," I said, not bothering to hide the break in my voice. He nodded, unsurprised. "Most of us here have. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do?" I gestured to my filthy uniform, my unshaven face. "I'm nobody now." Gerald took a long drag of his cigarette, studying me through narrowed eyes. "You know what I learned in Nam? Being nobody can be a superpower. People don't see you coming." I laughed bitterly. I'm fighting a judge, the legal system, and my ex-wife with the money I used to have. Not exactly a fair fight. "Fair fights are for movies," Gerald said, standing with a grunt. "Real fights get won by the guy willing to dig deeper than anyone thinks possible." I looked up at him, this man who'd survived war and decades on the streets. And how do I do that? Start by remembering who you were before all this, before the house, the job, the wife. There was a man there who knew how to fight. Find him. If you're touched by this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, share, have you ever experienced betrayal or injustice? Let's create a supportive community together. Bloco 3, a revolution complete, 100 palavras. The eviction notice came from my mother's house on a Wednesday, giving me 72 hours to remove any remaining personal property. I hadn't been back since they'd changed the locks, but I still had the key to the cellar bulkhead, a separate entrance my father had installed decades ago. I arrived at dawn, wearing my shelter-issued jacket and carrying an empty duffel bag. The neighborhood was quiet, houses dark. I circled to the back, pried open the rusted bulkhead, and descended into the darkness, using my phone's flashlight to navigate. The basement smelled of mildew and forgotten things. Mom had been a meticulous housekeeper upstairs, but the basement had been Dad's domain, cluttered, chaotic, and off-limits to everyone else. After his death, I'd meant to clear it out, but never found the time. Now, I was grateful for my procrastination. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Family photos, perhaps, or Dad's old pocket watch. Something to hold on to when everything else was gone. I swept my light across stacked boxes, old furniture, tools hanging on pegboards. In the far corner stood Dad's old metal filing cabinet. He'd been obsessive about documentation, a trait I'd inherited and refined in law school. I pulled open the top drawer, expecting tax returns or warranty cards for appliances long replaced. Daniel. My name, written in Dad's distinctive block letters, was on a thick manila envelope secured with string. I stared at it, heart suddenly pounding. The envelope contained a letter dated 2 weeks before his death and a small key. Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and circumstances have forced you to look deeper than you otherwise might have. I've watched you build a life of success and integrity, and I couldn't be prouder. But our family has enemies older than you know, and I've always feared they might someday come for you as they once came for me. Behind the furnace is a concealed safe. This key opens it. Inside is insurance I hoped you'd never need. Use it wisely, and remember that justice and vengeance, while cousins, are not the same. Your loving father, Earl. My hands trembled as I moved to the ancient oil furnace. Behind it, just as Dad promised, was a panel that swung open to reveal a wall safe I'd never known existed. The key turned smoothly. Inside was a weathered leather briefcase, heavy with contents I couldn't begin to imagine. I carried it to Dad's workbench and opened the tarnished brass latches. Inside were dozens of microcassette tapes, each labeled with dates spanning 3 decades, a digital recorder, and a leather-bound journal. But what caught my eye was a sealed envelope marked Palmer. I broke the seal and unfolded the contents. Bank statements, wire transfers, offshore account numbers, and photographs. Judge Palmer with men I recognized from news reports about organized crime investigations. Palmer accepting envelopes in parking garages. Palmer at private meetings with developers whose projects later received favorable rulings. My father, Earl Harmon, had been Judge Palmer's court reporter for 27 years before a stroke forced his early retirement. The man who sat silently in the corner of the courtroom, recording every word, observing every interaction, the man no one noticed. With shaking hands, I inserted one of the tapes into the recorder. My father's voice filled the basement. September 18, 1994. Meeting with Palmer and Donovan after hours. Subject, Westridge development hearings. Then Palmer's voice, unmistakable. The environmental impact statement is a problem. $3 million makes it go away. Cash, same arrangement as River Point. I played another tape, and another. Years of corruption, bribery, case-fixing, all meticulously documented by my father. In the journal, he'd noted dates, participants, amounts. He'd created a parallel record of every case where Palmer had sold justice to the highest bidder. And in a separate section labeled Personal, he'd documented Palmer's affairs, including one with Linda Carter, wife of James Carter, the same attorney now representing Melissa. The web of corruption and betrayal expanded with each page I turned. My mind raced. This wasn't just leverage, it was nuclear. Palmer had violated judicial ethics, committed federal crimes. The scandal would destroy not just him, but dozens of powerful figures across the state. I sat back, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what I held. Dad hadn't just left me evidence, he'd left me a weapon. But using it meant entering a dangerous world. These people had already taken everything from me. What more could they do? As dawn broke, throwing weak light through the dirty basement windows, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I quickly repacked the briefcase and moved to the shadows. Footsteps overhead. Then a familiar voice called my name. "Daniel, you in here? It's Mark." My brother had come looking for me. I climbed the stairs and found him in the kitchen, concern etched on his face. "Jesus, Daniel, you look." He trailed off, taking in my appearance. "Homeless?" I supplied. "Because I am." Mark shook his head. "I've been trying to find you for weeks. Went to the shelter, but they said you'd stopped coming." "Been sleeping wherever I can," I admitted. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you, I guess, saying goodbye to the house." He looked around the kitchen, eyes lingering on the chipped Formica table where we'd eaten countless meals. I brought coffee. We sat at that table one last time, steam rising from paper cups. I studied my brother, the one person who hadn't abandoned me. "Should I tell him what I'd found?" "Mark," I began carefully, "what would you say if I told you I had a way to fix everything, to take back what was stolen from me?" His eyes narrowed. "I'd say be careful. Those people already proved they'd do anything to protect themselves. What if I had proof of crimes, corruption, enough to not just get my life back, but to destroy theirs?" Mark set down his coffee. "This isn't theoretical, is it? You found something." I nodded slowly. "Is it legal?" he asked. "The evidence? Yes. What was done to obtain it?" I shrugged. "Gray area. Dad was thorough." Mark leaned forward. "Before you go down this road, ask yourself what you really want. Revenge? Justice? Your daughter back? Because those might require different strategies." I thought about Sophie, about Gerald's words at the shelter, about the father who had prepared for this day long before I knew I'd need it. "I want all of it," I said finally. "Justice for what they did to me. My daughter back, and yes, I want them to pay." Mark studied me for a long moment. "Then you'll need help, legal help you can trust. I can't afford an attorney anymore, remember?" A smile ghosted across his face. "Actually, I might know someone. Catherine Zhao. We went to law school together. She specializes in judicial misconduct cases, and she hates Palmer almost as much as you do now." I clutched the briefcase tighter. "Will she take a case on contingency? Because this," I tapped the leather surface, "this could be worth millions in settlements." Mark's eyes widened. "That good? Better. But I need to be smart, strategic. Once I use this, there's no going back." "Then let's do it right," Mark said, pulling out his phone. "I'll call Catherine now." As he dialed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just for survival, but for justice, for redemption, for a chance to rebuild what had been so methodically destroyed. This reversal surprise you? But wait, it's not over. Share this video with someone who needs to believe that life can turn around when you least expect it. Bloco 4. Justiça e confronto. 1000 palavras. Catherine Zhao agreed to meet us that same day at her Manhattan office. She listened silently as I explained my situation, her expression giving away nothing. When I placed my father's briefcase on her desk and showed her a small sample of its contents, she finally spoke. "This is extraordinary," she said, carefully examining one of the transcripts. "Your father documented everything, dates, amounts, witnesses." "Is it enough?" I asked. "Enough?" She looked up, dark eyes intense. "Mr. Harmon, this is enough to trigger the largest judicial corruption investigation in state history. But before we proceed, I need to know your primary objective. What matters most to you?" "Sophie," I said without hesitation, "getting my daughter back." Catherine nodded. "Then we move strategically. No press, no grandstanding." We use this leverage surgically. Over the next 3 weeks, Catherine assembled a small team of trusted associates. We established secure communications, digitized the tapes, created backup copies stored in multiple locations. My father's meticulous evidence became a detailed legal strategy. Meanwhile, Mark insisted I stay with him, giving me a place to shower, sleep, and slowly reclaim my dignity. I trimmed my beard, cut my hair, and began exercising again, preparing for the confrontation to come. Our first move was a sealed filing with the federal prosecutor's office. Just enough evidence to open an investigation into Palmer, but not revealing our full hand. Simultaneously, Catherine filed a motion to reopen my custody case based on new evidence of judicial misconduct and collusion. The reaction was swift. Within 48 hours, Judge Palmer's clerk called Catherine, requesting a private meeting. We declined, insisting any discussion happen with all parties present, including federal attorneys. 10 days after our initial filings, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Daniel?" Melissa's voice, uncertain in a way I'd never heard. "We need to talk." "Through counsel only," I replied, following Catherine's strict instructions. "Please," she said, her composure cracking, "they're saying terrible things, that Franklin fixed cases, that I was involved. They've frozen our accounts. Sophie is asking questions I can't answer." I closed my eyes, picturing my daughter confused and frightened. "That's unfortunate. Daniel, whatever you think happened." "I don't think, Melissa. I know. Every detail, every conversation, every deal." I paused. "Earl knew too. He kept records." Silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered, "What do you want?" "Meeting. Tomorrow. My attorney's office. Bring Palmer and Carter." The conference room at Zhao & Associates was deliberately intimidating. Wall-to-wall windows over Manhattan. Modern furnishings in steel and glass. I wore a suit Mark had bought me, sitting between Catherine and a senior prosecutor named Abernathy. When they entered, Melissa, Palmer, and Carter, I noted their appearances with detached interest. Melissa looked sleepless, Palmer ashen, Carter combative. Gone was their previous confidence. Catherine opened with clinical precision. "We have evidence of judicial misconduct spanning 27 years. Bribery, extortion, case-fixing. We have documented 36 specific instances involving Judge Palmer, 14 involving Mr. Carter, and 3 involving Mrs. Harmon." Carter puffed up. "These are outrageous allegations without." Catherine slid 3 manila folders across the table, one to each. Evidence samples. Page 1 contains a transcript from July 14th last year. The 3 of you discussing how to manipulate my client's custody case. Page 2 details wire transfers to offshore accounts. Page 3 contains photographic evidence. I watched their faces as they reviewed the documents. Melissa paled, Palmer's hands trembled, and Carter's bluster evaporated. "The full evidence has been secured with multiple dead men switches," I said, speaking for the first time. "If anything happens to me or to those assisting me, everything goes to the press, the state bar, and federal prosecutors simultaneously." Palmer found his voice. "What exactly do you want, Daniel?" "Full custody of Sophie. Immediate return of all assets transferred since litigation began. My partnership restored with compensation for damages. Public apologies. And your resignations, both of you," I said, looking between Palmer and Carter. "You'll destroy us," Melissa whispered. "No," I leaned forward. "You did that yourselves. I'm offering you a chance most of your victims never got. A way out that doesn't end in prison." Carter recovered enough to attempt negotiation. "This is excessive. Perhaps joint custody, a reasonable settlement?" "This isn't a negotiation," Abernathy interjected. "It's the most generous offer you're going to get. My office has seen enough evidence to justify multiple federal indictments. Mr. Harmon is showing restraint I'm not obligated to match." I stood, buttoning my jacket. You have 48 hours to accept these terms. After that, we proceed with full disclosure and criminal charges. As I turned to leave, Melissa caught my arm. Daniel, please, think about what this will do to Sophie. I looked into the eyes of the woman I'd once loved beyond reason. I am thinking about Sophie. Every decision, every filing, every word is about protecting her from the people who were willing to sacrifice her future for their gain. I walked out without looking back, Catherine at my side. 2 days later, they accepted our terms. Within a week, Judge Palmer announced his resignation, citing health concerns. James Carter took an indefinite leave of absence from his firm. The house keys were returned to me through counsel, along with access to all financial accounts. The hardest part was explaining to Sophie. I sat with her in her bedroom, surrounded by the stuffed animals and soccer trophies that marked her childhood. "Did Mom really do those bad things?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "People sometimes make mistakes, especially when they're afraid or angry," I said carefully. "Your mom loves you, that hasn't changed, but the court decided you should live with me now. And Judge Franklin?" I struggled to find words appropriate for a 12-year-old. "He didn't follow the rules judges have to follow. That's why he had to stop being a judge." She nodded slowly. "I heard Mom crying on the phone. She said you could have sent them to jail, but you didn't." My throat tightened. Punishment isn't always justice, Soph. Sometimes it's better to fix what's broken than to break something else in return. Sophie leaned against me, her small body still fitting perfectly against mine despite the months we'd lost. "I'm glad you're home, Dad." "Me too, kiddo," I whispered into her hair. "Me too." 3 months after moving back into our home, I received an unexpected visitor. Gerald, the Vietnam vet from the shelter, stood on my doorstep in clean clothes, holding a small duffel bag. "You said to come if I ever wanted off the streets," he said gruffly. "That offer still good?" I smiled and opened the door wider. "The guest house is yours for as long as you need. Welcome home, Gerald." Bloco 5. Reflexão, legado e encerramento. 1000 palavras. 2 years later, I stand in my office at Harmon Justice Foundation, watching snowfall on the Manhattan skyline. The foundation, funded with the $142.6 million in settlements from Palmer's judicial misconduct cases, occupies the entire 10th floor of a Midtown building. We've helped overturn 37 wrongful convictions, provided legal assistance to 218 families facing wrongful eviction, and funded law school scholarships for 43 students committed to ethical practice. The brass nameplate on my desk includes a quote from my father: "Justice delayed is still justice worth fighting for." I touch it each morning as a reminder. Sophie is 14 now, captain of her school's debate team, and fiercely opinionated about everything from climate policy to which movies we watch on Friday nights. She splits time between my house and Melissa's apartment in White Plains. The transition wasn't easy, but we established new boundaries and routines. Sophie attends therapy weekly, as do Melissa and I separately. Healing is slow, but it's happening. Melissa works as an office manager at a dental practice. The settlements required her to surrender her law license, though she could reapply after 5 years. I've told Sophie I won't oppose reinstatement if that's what Melissa chooses. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. But it does mean allowing for redemption. Judge Palmer moved to Arizona after his resignation. The full extent of his corruption never became public, though rumors persist. The plea agreement included substantial financial penalties but no prison time, a decision that still troubles me sometimes. James Carter practices real estate law in New Jersey now, his influence in the legal community permanently diminished. Mark and his wife had their second child last spring, a boy they named Earl after our father. He partnered with Catherine Zhao to form a new firm specializing in judicial accountability cases. They're currently investigating 3 judges in neighboring counties. Gerald still lives in my guest house, though he hardly needs my charity anymore. He manages the Foundation's veteran outreach program and speaks regularly at shelters and VA hospitals. Being at rock bottom gives you the perfect foundation to build something new, he tells the men and women who remind him of himself. My old firm, Caldwell and Bishop, offered me my partnership back with a significant ownership stake. I declined. Some bridges can't and shouldn't be rebuilt. Cameron Bishop sent a handwritten apology last Christmas. I appreciate the gesture, but haven't responded. The legal community treats me differently now, with a mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. I'm more selective about which cases I take, focusing on those involving systemic abuse of power. My father's legacy shaped this new purpose. He spent decades silently documenting corruption while working within a broken system. I have the privilege of working to repair it. The hardest lesson was learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. During those months of homelessness, I lost faith in my judgment, in my ability to distinguish allies from enemies. I questioned every decision that had led to my downfall. Gerald taught me that trust isn't about eliminating risk, it's about developing resilience. You'll get knocked down again, he told me. Different way, different people. Question is, will you know how to get back up? I keep a small box on my bookshelf containing items from that period. The shelter ID card, my father's letter, the key to his safe. They remind me that our lowest moments often contain the seeds of our rebirth. The wooden boat my father and I carved together sits beside it, restored now, but still bearing the scars of its journey. Like me, it's more valuable because of what it survived. My relationship with Sophie has deepened in unexpected ways. We talk more honestly now. Last month, she asked about my time at the shelter, a conversation we'd avoided. "Were you scared?" she asked, curled beside me on the couch. "Terrified," I admitted. Not just of the physical danger, but of disappearing completely, of becoming invisible. She considered this. "Is that why you give Gerald's friends jobs at the Foundation? So they won't be invisible?" "Partly," I said, impressed by her insight. "But also because everyone deserves a second chance when systems fail them. And because talent comes from unexpected places. The Foundation's hiring policy requires that 30% of our staff come from shelters, halfway houses, or re-entry programs. Our most brilliant paralegal was homeless for 3 years after serving time for a non-violent offense. Our office manager lived in her car while working 3 jobs to support her children. They bring perspectives my law school classmates never could. On Wednesdays, Sophie and I still get ice cream at Morgan's, though now she orders Rocky Road instead of mint chocolate chip. Small changes that mark the passage of time, the evolution of the child into her own person. Sometimes we visit my mother's old house. The new owners were kind enough to let us plant a memorial garden in the backyard, peonies and forget-me-nots, my mother's favorites. We never discuss the basement. Sophie knows the basic outline of what happened, but not the details. Someday, when she's older, I'll tell her the full story. She deserves to know about the grandfather who protected her father long after his death, about the true meaning of justice versus revenge. Last week, I received a letter from a man in Buffalo whose family had lost everything in a predatory lending scheme approved by a corrupt judge. He'd heard about our foundation and was seeking help. His words echoed my own desperation from 2 years ago. I just want someone to listen, to believe me. I called him personally, listened for an hour as he detailed his family's ordeal. When he finished, I told him, "I believe you, and we're going to help." There was a long silence, then the sound of quiet weeping. I remembered that moment, when someone finally acknowledges the injustice you've suffered, when your invisibility ends. It's like taking your first full breath after nearly drowning. The system that nearly destroyed me remains deeply flawed. Palmer was one corrupt judge among many. Carter was one unethical attorney in a profession that sometimes rewards ruthlessness over integrity. The mechanisms that enabled their abuse of power, secrecy, cronyism, unchecked authority, continue to operate. But I've learned that systems can change when enough people refuse to accept their brokenness. Each case we take, each family we help, each corrupt official we expose chips away at the edifice of power that seems so impenetrable from the outside. My father understood this. His meticulously labeled tapes weren't just insurance, they were an act of faith. Faith that someday the truth would matter. Faith that justice, though delayed, would eventually prevail. He couldn't fight openly, so he fought in the way available to him, patiently, invisibly, one recorded conversation at a time. I sometimes wonder what he would think of the foundation, of the man I've become. Would he approve of the choices I've made, the compromises, the moments of mercy? I like to think he would. That somewhere, Earl Harmon is nodding with that slight smile I can still picture perfectly, saying, "That's my boy." The wooden boat sits on my shelf, a reminder that we build things to last beyond ourselves. My father built evidence that saved me. I'm building a foundation that will outlive me. Sophie is building her own understanding of justice that will carry forward into her generation. This is how change happens, not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in careful, deliberate actions that accumulate over time. In choices to document rather than ignore, to rebuild rather than destroy, to remember rather than forget. When I lost everything, my home, my career, my reputation, my daughter, I believed it was the end of my story. I couldn't see that it was merely the turning of a page, that what appeared to be an ending was actually the painful beginning of something more meaningful than I could have imagined. If there's one thing I would tell anyone facing their own darkness, it's this. What seems like the worst moment of your life may actually be the pivot upon which everything turns. The basement where you've been forced to retreat may contain exactly what you need to build a different future. I am not the same man who stood in that courtroom 2 years ago, watching his life being dismantled piece by piece. I am not the same man who slept on a shelter cot, counting the remaining dollars in his wallet. Those experiences are part of me now, informing every decision, every interaction, every case we take. The justice I found wasn't perfect. Some wrongs can never be fully righted. But I've learned that perfect justice isn't the point. The point is to keep fighting for better justice than we have now. To use whatever tools we've been given, a briefcase of tapes, a law degree, a foundation, a story, to leave the system slightly better than we found it. That's the true legacy my father left me. Not revenge, but persistence. Not a weapon, but a blueprint for positive change. In the end, justice isn't a destination we reach, but a path we choose to walk, step by difficult step, no matter how long the journey takes. If this story touched your soul, if you believe justice exists and that we can rise from the ashes, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. In the comments, share your own story of overcoming adversity. Let's support each other. Share this video with someone going through a difficult time. Remember, your story isn't over yet, and the best chapters may be yet to come. 2 incredible stories are appearing on screen now. Choose one to continue this journey of hope. Until next time, and may you find your own victorious turning point. God bless you.